Rizwan was enjoying a quiet Saturday morning. He had brewed himself a hot cup of tea and settled into his old but comfortable chair near the window. The neighborhood outside looked calm. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, children rode their bicycles on the street, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. It felt like a peaceful morning, the kind Rizwan liked. He had only taken a few sips of his tea when a loud knock shook the door. It was not the usual soft knock of a neighbor. This one was sharp and repeated quickly, almost demanding. Rizwan set his cup down on the table and frowned. He stood up and walked slowly toward the door, his mind already racing with questions. Who could it be this early? Was it a delivery? Was it one of the neighbors needing help? The knocking continued, firm and commanding. When Rizwan opened the door, he froze. Standing there were two police officers. Their uniforms were neatly pressed and their expressions were serious. Behind them, a patrol car was parked on the side of the street. The car's lights were off, but the presence of the officers was enough to make Rizwan's heart beat faster. The taller officer gave a polite nod. "Good morning, sir. Are you the homeowner here?" Rizwan's voice was cautious but calm. "Yes, I am. Is there a problem, officers?" The shorter officer held a clipboard and glanced at some papers before speaking. "We received a call from the Homeowners Association. They asked us to come and check on a possible issue at this address." Rizwan blinked in confusion. "A possible issue? What issue?" The taller officer shook his head slightly. "They did not provide details, sir. They only said there was a complaint or disturbance that needed to be checked." Rizwan's confusion deepened. He had lived in this neighborhood for years. The HOA had always been strict, but this seemed like a step too far. They usually sent letters about small matters, like if the grass was a little overgrown, if a trash can was visible after pickup day, or if a car was parked too close to the curb. But calling the police over a complaint? That felt unnecessary and extreme. He tried to keep his voice steady. "Officers, I don't know what they are talking about. There is no disturbance here. My wife and I live a quiet life. We don't cause trouble." The shorter officer gave a small shrug. "We understand, sir. But since we received the call, we are required to make sure everything is fine." At that moment, Rizwan heard the sound of footsteps behind him. His wife, Amina, had just come home from her night shift. She worked long hours and had barely changed out of her uniform. She stepped into the hallway, her boots making a firm sound against the wooden floor. Amina walked toward the door, still wearing her professional uniform. She adjusted her cap as she came closer. Her posture was straight, and her eyes were sharp, the kind of presence that demanded respect without her needing to say a word. When the officers saw her step into view, their expressions shifted immediately. Their shoulders stiffened and they both looked momentarily unsure of what to do. It was as if they had not expected to see someone in authority standing in front of them. Amina's voice was calm but carried weight. "Officers, what is the problem here?" The taller officer hesitated. He cleared his throat and said, "We received a call from the HOA. They said there was a complaint at this house." Amina folded her arms and looked directly at them. "What kind of complaint?" There was silence for a moment. The officers exchanged quick glances as though trying to find the right words. Finally, the shorter one spoke. "They didn't give us clear information, ma'am. Only that there might be a disturbance." Amina raised an eyebrow. "So the HOA asked you to come here without any details?" Both officers seemed uncomfortable under her gaze. They had likely expected a simple visit, maybe a nervous homeowner who would quickly explain and let them leave. Instead, they were now standing in front of someone who clearly understood procedure, authority, and respect. Rizwan stood quietly by her side, watching the scene unfold. He knew his wife's presence had already changed the atmosphere. He felt both proud and relieved. Amina continued, her tone steady. "Officers, you know as well as I do that complaints should be specific. If there was truly a disturbance, it should have been reported properly. Otherwise, this is a misuse of your time and ours." The taller officer shifted uncomfortably. "You're right, ma'am. We just have to respond to every call we receive, even if the details are not clear." Amina nodded slowly. "I understand you are doing your job, but I also know the HOA has been overstepping for a while now. They have sent letters for small matters before. But calling the police for something like this, that is not acceptable." The officers did not argue. They both seemed aware that this situation was different from what they had expected. Rizwan decided to speak up. "Officers, would you like to come inside and see for yourselves that everything is fine? There is no disturbance here. My wife just returned from her shift and we were about to have breakfast." The taller officer quickly shook his head. "No need, sir. We can already see there is no problem here." For a moment, the four of them stood there in silence. The air was heavy, not with tension but with the weight of realization. The officers seemed to understand that they had been sent here unnecessarily. Amina's voice softened slightly. "Then I suggest you let the HOA know that sending you here without a valid reason is not the right use of resources. If they have concerns, they can contact us directly or follow proper procedures." Both officers nodded quickly. The shorter one said, "We'll make a note of it in our report, ma'am." They gave a polite nod to Rizwan and Amina before turning back toward their patrol car. The sound of their footsteps on the driveway faded as they walked away. A moment later, the car started and they drove off slowly down the street. Rizwan closed the door gently. He turned to his wife and let out a long breath he had been holding. "That was unexpected," he said quietly. Amina removed her cap and set it on the table. "It was unnecessary," she replied. "But now we know the HOA is crossing lines. This is not the last time they will try something like this." Rizwan looked at her with concern. "What do you mean?" Amina met his eyes. "When people like them feel power, they try to push it further. Today they wasted the police's time. Tomorrow they might do something worse. We need to be ready." Her words settled heavily in the room. Rizwan realized she was right. This incident was not just an isolated event. It was a sign of something larger, something that would soon test their patience and strength. For now, the house was quiet again. But the morning that had started so peacefully had already changed, and Rizwan knew deep inside that this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The day after the police visit, Rizwan tried to return to his normal routine, but his mind would not settle. He kept replaying the scene at the door, the sharp knock, the serious expressions of the officers, and the way they froze when Amina stepped out in her uniform. He knew it was not just a random complaint. Someone from the HOA had decided to stir trouble, and this was only the first move. The next morning, as he walked outside to collect the mail, he noticed an envelope marked with the HOA's logo. His chest tightened as he opened it. Inside was a formal letter printed on crisp paper. The letter read, "Notice of violation, dear homeowner. It has come to our attention that your property has been the subject of complaints regarding noise, disturbances, and improper appearances. We take these issues seriously as they affect the quality of life in our community. Please address these concerns immediately to avoid further action." Rizwan stared at the letter, his hands shaking slightly. Noise, disturbances, improper appearances? None of that was true. His house was well kept and his family lived quietly. He sighed deeply and carried the letter inside. Amina was in the kitchen making breakfast. She looked tired but alert, her hair tied neatly, her posture as straight as ever. Rizwan placed the letter on the table in front of her. She read it slowly, her eyes narrowing with each line. When she finished, she set it down with a calm but firm expression. "This is not about noise or appearances. This is about control. They want to test how far they can push us." Rizwan rubbed his forehead. "But why us? We don't bother anyone. We keep everything in order." Amina looked at him thoughtfully. Sometimes people choose targets because they think they are easy to push around. But they do not realize who they are dealing with. Her tone carried a quiet strength that reassured Rizwan. That evening, they decided to attend the HOA meeting scheduled for the week. It was held in the community center, a small building at the end of the street. Rizwan had rarely gone to these meetings before, but this time he knew they had no choice. The hall was filled with neighbors sitting on folding chairs. At the front table sat the HOA board members. The president, Mr. Harris, was a man with a sharp suit and an even sharper tone. He liked rules and enjoyed reminding others of them. When the meeting began, Mr. Harris cleared his throat and started with announcements. Then he moved on to community concerns. One of the board members raised a paper and said, "We have received complaints about certain households not maintaining proper standards. These include noise during late hours, unapproved decorations, and unsightly trash bins." Rizwan could feel several eyes turning toward him. His stomach tightened. Before he could speak, Amina rose from her seat. Her presence drew attention immediately. She spoke clearly, her voice steady but firm. "My family received a letter yesterday about so-called disturbances. I would like to know exactly who filed these complaints and what evidence supports them. The room grew quiet. People whispered among themselves, surprised at her directness. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. Ma'am, complaints are confidential. We cannot reveal who made them. Amina's gaze did not waver. Then what proof do you have that these complaints are real and not simply harassment? Mr. Harris shifted uncomfortably. We act on information given to us. It is our duty to protect the community. Amina took a step closer to the table. Protecting the community means being fair. Calling the police to our door without reason is not fairness. Sending vague letters without evidence is not fairness. If there is a real issue, it must be documented. Otherwise, this is nothing more than intimidation. Murmurs spread across the room. Several neighbors nodded quietly. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Rizwan watched with admiration. He had always known his wife was strong, but seeing her stand up in front of the entire room filled him with pride. Mr. Harris cleared his throat again, trying to regain control. We will review the procedures, he said curtly. But you must understand the rules exist for everyone. Amina's eyes stayed on him. And rules must be applied with honesty, not abuse. The rest of the meeting dragged on, but the energy in the room had shifted. The board members looked uneasy, and some neighbors seemed to quietly support Rizwan and Amina. That night, back at home, Rizwan sat with Amina in the living room. The atmosphere was calmer, but the weight of the situation still hung heavy. They won't stop, Rizwan said softly. I saw the look on Harris's face. He doesn't like being challenged. Amina nodded. He will try again, but we will be ready. We won't let them push us around. The following week, more small incidents began to happen. A neighbor mentioned receiving a note about parking too close to Rizwan's driveway, though the car had been parked properly. Another neighbor hinted that the HOA had been asking questions about Amina's work hours, as if her late shifts somehow disrupted the community. Rizwan realized this was becoming a pattern. The HOA was searching for excuses, any small reason to pressure them. One evening, as Rizwan stepped outside to water the plants, he noticed a man in a suit standing near the corner of his property, holding a clipboard. It was one of the HOA board members, pretending to check something on the street but clearly watching Rizwan's house. Rizwan felt anger rise but kept his calm. He finished watering the plants and went back inside, determined not to give them any excuse. Inside, Amina listened carefully as he explained what he had seen. She placed her hand on his shoulder. This is exactly what I expected. They are trying to provoke us. But remember, the stronger we stay, the weaker their tactics become. Over the next few days, Rizwan and Amina decided to document everything. They kept records of letters, noted times when people watched the house, and even spoke to friendly neighbors who agreed to keep an eye out. It was not easy. The constant pressure weighed on them, but they refused to give in. Then one morning a new letter arrived. This time it was marked Final Warning in bold letters. It read, Final Notice. Due to repeated concerns about disturbances and community violations, you are hereby required to attend a private compliance hearing with the HOA board. Failure to appear may result in fines or further action. Rizwan felt his stomach sink. A private hearing? It felt like a trap. When he showed the letter to Amina, she read it carefully and then looked up with determination in her eyes. They think they can scare us with this, but they don't realize something. At that hearing, we will not go as victims. We will go prepared. Her words were steady and confident. Rizwan nodded slowly. Deep inside, he knew this confrontation was inevitable. And as he looked at his wife, standing strong in her uniform, he realized that the HOA had chosen the wrong family to target, because this was no longer about grass or trash cans or noise. This was about dignity, fairness, and standing tall when others tried to bend you, and the next battle was only a few days away. The morning of the hearing arrived with a heavy silence in the house. Rizwan woke up early, but he felt as though he had barely slept. His thoughts had kept him awake, circling endlessly around the same worries. The HOA had already shown how far they were willing to go. Now they had summoned him and Amina to a private hearing. The word itself sounded intimidating, as if he were being called to stand trial, but Amina's calmness gave him strength. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping her tea slowly, her uniform neatly pressed. Even though she had just returned from a long night shift, she looked as composed as ever, Don't worry, she told him. This is exactly what they want, to see you nervous. But we will not give them that. We will go in prepared and we will not bend. Rizwan nodded, though his heart still pounded with unease. The hearing was scheduled at the community center, the same place where the public meetings were held. But this time it was only for them and the board. When they arrived, the small building looked ordinary from the outside, yet Rizwan felt like he was walking into enemy ground. Inside, the board members were already seated behind a long table. At the center sat Mr. Harris, the HOA president, his sharp eyes watching them as they entered. On either side of him sat 2 other board members, both holding folders thick with papers. Please, have a seat, Harris said with a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. Rizwan and Amina sat across from them. The room was plain, with white walls and a clock ticking loudly above the door. The air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves carried judgment. Harris began in a formal tone. Mr. and Mrs. Rizwan, thank you for attending. As you know, there have been several complaints regarding your property. These include noise disturbances, improper appearances, and potential violations of community guidelines. We are here today to discuss these matters and determine the next steps. Rizwan opened his mouth to respond, but Amina placed a calm hand on his arm. She spoke first. Before we begin, I would like to request that every claim be backed with documented evidence. We are not here to listen to vague accusations. We are here to address facts. Harris's smile tightened. Of course, evidence is important, but the HOA also relies on the trust of its members. When neighbors bring concerns, we take them seriously. Amina leaned forward slightly. Taking concerns seriously does not mean turning them into false charges. If there is noise, where is the record? If there are improper appearances, where are the photographs? If there are disturbances, where is the official report? Without these, what you are doing is not protecting the community. It is harassing us. The other 2 board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Harris cleared his throat. We are not here to argue, Mrs. Rizwan. We are here to resolve. Rizwan finally spoke, his voice steady though his palms were damp. Then resolve it fairly. Because so far we have received nothing but vague letters and police at our door for no reason. That is not fairness. Harris flipped open the folder in front of him. He pulled out a sheet of paper. Here, he said, is a complaint from a neighbor who reported loud noises coming from your home after midnight on 3 separate occasions. Rizwan frowned. That is impossible. My wife works night shifts. I am alone in the house at those hours and I sleep early. There is no noise. Amina's tone was firm. May I see the details of the complaint? Dates, times, and the name of the person who reported it? Harris hesitated. The names of complainants are confidential. Confidential does not mean you can hide behind shadows, Amina replied. You expect us to defend ourselves against invisible witnesses and baseless claims? That is not justice. Her words struck the room like a hammer. One of the board members coughed nervously while the other looked down at his papers. Harris tried again, pulling out another sheet. There was also a concern about your trash bins being left in view for several days. Rizwan shook his head firmly. I take the bins in the same day every week, sometimes within the hour. I have never left them out for days. Amina leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. Do you have photographs of this so-called violation? Silence filled the room. Harris flipped through the papers, but no photographs appeared. Then this is nothing, Amina said calmly. You cannot issue warnings on the basis of rumors. The board members exchanged glances. It was becoming clear that the evidence they claimed to have was thin, perhaps non-existent. Rizwan felt a surge of strength. For the first time since this ordeal began, he realized they were not powerless. The HOA might wear the mask of authority, but without proof their mask was cracking. Harris's face grew red. You need to understand something, he said sharply. This community functions on cooperation and respect for rules. If every homeowner challenges us like this, there will be chaos. Amina's voice was calm, but her words were sharp. Rules are not the problem. Abuse of rules is the problem. And respect cannot be demanded through fear. It must be earned through fairness. The room grew quiet again. Even the ticking of the clock seemed louder. Finally, one of the board members cleared his throat. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should take some time to review these complaints more carefully before moving forward. Harris shot him a glare but said nothing. Amina stood, her posture tall and commanding. We are willing to cooperate when the process is fair. But until then, we will not accept baseless accusations. If this continues, we will not hesitate to take this matter beyond the HOA. Her meaning was clear. She was not just a homeowner. She was someone who understood rules, procedure, and authority better than most. Rizwan followed her lead, standing beside her. Together they walked out of the room, leaving the board members in uneasy silence. Outside, the air felt fresher, as though the walls of the community center had been suffocating them. Rizwan let out a deep breath. "You were incredible in there," he said to Amina. She smiled slightly. "I only said what needed to be said. They are used to people being afraid. When someone stands up, they don't know how to respond." Rizwan nodded slowly. He knew the battle was not over, but today felt like a victory. For the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed quietly with whispers. Word of the private hearing spread, even though it was not supposed to. Some neighbors came to Rizwan privately, offering quiet support. One elderly couple even stopped by with a plate of cookies, saying, "We've had our own issues with the HOA. You're not alone." The support warmed Rizwan's heart, but it also made him realize how many people had been silently suffering under the board's strict control. But then, just when things seemed calmer, another surprise arrived. One evening, Rizwan heard footsteps outside. When he looked through the window, he saw a patrol car parked once again in front of his house. His heart sank. The police were back. He opened the door before they knocked. The same two officers from before stood there, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Sir," the taller one said, "we received another call from the HOA. They reported suspicious activity at this address." Rizwan felt his chest tighten. But before he could respond, Amina stepped forward once again, still in her uniform. Her eyes locked on the officers. "Suspicious activity? And what exactly does that mean?" The officers glanced at each other. "They didn't say, ma'am. Just told us to check in." Amina's tone was sharp but steady. "Then you can see with your own eyes there is nothing suspicious here. And I will be filing a complaint myself if this harassment continues. Do you understand?" The officers nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. We understand." They left almost immediately, their patrol car pulling away faster than before. Rizwan closed the door and turned to Amina. He felt both anger and pride burning inside him. "They really won't stop, will they?" Amina placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, but neither will we." That night, as they sat together in the quiet living room, Rizwan realized something. This was no longer just about their house or the HOA. This was about showing that no one could misuse power without being challenged. And though the struggle was far from over, he felt ready for whatever came next because he knew he was not facing it alone. The days following the second police visit were heavy with tension. Rizwan felt the weight of invisible eyes every time he stepped outside. The neighbors waved politely, but he could not shake the feeling that someone was always watching. The HOA had turned into a shadow looming over his home, and the patrol car at his door had only made things worse. Yet through all of this, Amina remained steady. Her uniformed presence had forced the officers to retreat twice, but she knew that simply sending them away was not enough. The HOA would not stop unless someone stopped them. One morning, as the sun rose over the neighborhood, Amina sat at the kitchen table with a notebook open in front of her. Rizwan walked in, still half awake, and found her writing carefully. "What are you working on so early?" he asked. She looked up with a calm but determined expression. "I am making a record. Every letter, every false complaint, every police visit, everything they have done to us. If they want to play with paperwork, then we will meet them with stronger paperwork." Rizwan sat down across from her. "Do you think it will help?" "Yes," she said firmly. "The truth is always stronger when it is written down. They count on people being too afraid to push back. But we will not be silent. If they call the police again without proof, we will show the officers our record. If the board tries another hearing, we will bring this record. And if things go further, we will take it beyond this neighborhood." Her confidence settled into him like a steady flame. He realized she was right. The HOA thrived on fear and silence, but silence was no longer an option. That evening, as Rizwan was trimming the hedge outside, a neighbor slowly approached. It was Mr. Rahim, an older man who had lived on the street for more than 20 years. His back was slightly bent and his steps were slow, but his eyes were kind. "Good evening, Rizwan. Rahim said softly. "Good evening, Uncle," Rizwan replied respectfully. Rahim looked around as if to make sure no one else was near. Then he leaned closer. "I heard about the hearing. I heard about the police. I want you to know you are not alone. The HOA has troubled many of us, but most people are too scared to speak." Rizwan felt a wave of relief. "You too?" Rahim nodded. "Yes. Last year they sent me 3 warnings for painting my door a color they did not like, even though it was within the approved shades. I had to pay fines just to end the letters. I did not have the strength to fight." Rizwan's chest tightened. He had suspected others were suffering silently, but hearing it confirmed made the reality heavier. Rahim placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "But you and Amina, you are different. You are standing up, and many of us are quietly watching. If you keep going, maybe we will all find our voices." The words filled Rizwan with both courage and responsibility. This was no longer just about his family. This was about everyone in the neighborhood who had been pushed into silence. When he told Amina later that night, she nodded thoughtfully. "Then we are not only fighting for us, we are fighting for them too." The next week brought another challenge. A new letter appeared, this time accusing them of improper exterior maintenance. The letter claimed their hedge was unsightly and non-compliant. Rizwan laughed bitterly as he read it. He had trimmed it just days ago. Amina's eyes hardened as she read the paper. This is proof they are desperate. They are inventing things now. Instead of feeling defeated, they decided to act. That weekend, they invited several neighbors over for tea. At first, people were hesitant, worried about being seen as troublemakers. But slowly they came, Rahim and his wife, the young couple from down the street, and even the elderly lady who always walked her little dog. They sat together in the living room, cups of tea in hand, and listened as Amina spoke. "We know many of you have received unfair letters. We know some of you have paid fines that were not fair. This is not how a community should be. A community should be about respect, not fear. If we stay silent, the board will keep growing stronger. But if we stand together, they cannot ignore us." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Rahim spoke, his voice shaky but brave. "I will support you. I am tired of their bullying." Others nodded slowly, one by one. It was not yet a loud chorus, but it was the beginning of something. Encouraged, Amina suggested forming a small group to collect stories and records of unfair treatment. They would keep everything together, building a case that no board could dismiss. Over the next few weeks, neighbors quietly slipped papers into Rizwan's mailbox, copies of letters, notices, and fines they had received. Some were laughably petty, like warnings about flower pots being the wrong color. Others were heavier, like threats of liens on homes for unpaid fines. Rizwan and Amina organized everything into a binder, page after page of proof. With every story, their determination grew stronger. But the HOA also noticed. Harris and his board began sending more letters, not just to Rizwan but to others they suspected of supporting him. The pressure was rising, and the atmosphere in the neighborhood felt tense. Then came the day of the community-wide meeting, open to all residents. It was the perfect stage, and Amina knew it. That evening, the community center was packed. More people attended than usual, their whispers filling the hall. The board sat at the front table, Harris looking smug and confident, unaware of what was about to happen. The meeting began with routine announcements, but soon Harris opened the floor for concerns. Amina stood. The room quieted instantly. She carried the binder in her hands, thick with papers. "I have something to say," she began, her voice strong. "For months, my family has been harassed with baseless letters and false complaints. Police have been called to my door twice with no cause. We are not the only ones. Many of our neighbors have suffered the same treatment." She placed the binder on the table with a firm sound. "Here is the proof." Gasps rippled through the room as she opened the binder and spread the pages across the table. Letters, fines, warnings, all documented and dated. Neighbors leaned forward, nodding as they recognized their own experiences reflected in the pages. Harris's face paled. "This is not the place," he began, but his voice faltered as murmurs spread through the crowd. One by one, neighbors began to stand. Rahim spoke first. "They fined me for painting my door. I paid because I was scared," the young couple added. "They threatened us with legal action over a flower pot." Others followed, voices rising. the room filling with shared frustration that had been silent for too long. Rizwan watched in awe as the tide turned. For the first time, the power was not in the hands of the board. It was in the hands of the community. Amina's voice cut through the noise. We are not here to break rules. We are here to demand fairness. If this board cannot treat residents with honesty and respect, then this board does not deserve to lead. The crowd erupted with applause and cheers. Even those who had remained silent before now clapped, their courage sparked by the bravery of others. Harris tried to regain control, his voice rising above the noise. Order, we must have order. But it was clear his authority had cracked. That night the meeting ended in chaos for the board, but in hope for the community. For the first time, the residents realized they had a voice, and together, it was louder than the HOA's threats. As Rizwan and Amina walked home under the quiet night sky, Rizwan felt lighter than he had in months. You did it, he said softly. Amina shook her head. We did it. And this is only the beginning. Her words carried a promise. The fight was not over, but the tide had turned. The night after the stormy community meeting, the neighborhood felt different. For months, fear had sat like a heavy blanket over the residents. Now that blanket had been lifted. People walked with a little more confidence, exchanged longer greetings, and smiled with relief, knowing they were not alone anymore. But the board was not finished. Harris and the other members of the HOA met privately, frustrated that their authority had been shaken. They planned to strike back with legal notices, hoping to scare the community into silence once again. Rizwan and Amina knew it was coming. They sat at the kitchen table one evening, stacks of papers spread out in front of them. The binder of evidence lay open, now joined by emails from neighbors offering more stories and copies of notices. The pile had grown into a mountain. We are stronger together, Amina said, flipping through the pages. But strength needs direction. If we want real change, we must go beyond meetings. We need an election. Rizwan looked at her with surprise. An election? You mean to replace the board? Yes, she said firmly. The HOA is supposed to serve the people, not control them. If they are not doing their duty, the residents have the right to choose new leaders. The idea was bold, but Rizwan saw the truth in it. Slowly, word spread through the neighborhood. Small groups met in living rooms, backyards, and porches. People discussed openly what they had only whispered before. The board had ruled with fear, but now courage was growing like fire. One Saturday morning, Amina stood in the park with several neighbors by her side. She spoke clearly and calmly. The bylaws give us the right to call for a special election if enough of us sign a petition. We will gather those signatures. We will do it legally, and we will do it together. This is not rebellion. This is democracy. Hands went up, voices agreed, and the petition began. Day by day, Rizwan and Amina walked from house to house. Some residents hesitated, afraid of retaliation, but when they saw how many had already signed, they added their names. Others eagerly took the pen, grateful for the chance to finally be heard. Within 2 weeks, the petition had more than enough signatures. The board could not ignore it. A special election was set for the following month. The weeks leading up to the election were tense. Harris and his allies sent out letters trying to convince residents that replacing the board would bring chaos. But people were no longer blind to the truth. They had seen the binder, they had heard the stories, and they knew who was really causing chaos. On the other side, Amina and Rizwan worked tirelessly to keep the momentum alive. They did not present themselves as heroes. Instead, they encouraged others to step forward as candidates, neighbors who were fair, kind, and willing to listen. Rahim, the elderly man who had once suffered in silence, agreed to run. So did the young couple, who wanted a better future for their children. Election day arrived with clear skies. The community center buzzed with energy as residents filled the hall. Tables were set up, ballots prepared, and volunteers checked names at the entrance. For the first time, people felt that their voices truly mattered. Rizwan stood near the back, his heart beating fast. He was not running for a seat, but he knew the outcome of this day would shape the future of their lives in this neighborhood. Amina stood beside him, calm but alert, her sharp eyes watching everything. When the voting ended, the ballots were counted in front of everyone. One by one, the results were read aloud. The old board members, including Harris, lost seat after seat. Cheers erupted with each announcement. When Rahim's name was called as a new board member, the crowd stood and applauded. clapping for the man who had once been too afraid to speak but had now found his voice. By the end of the night, the entire board had been replaced with fresh, trusted faces. Harris sat in the corner, pale and silent, the weight of defeat heavy on his shoulders. His years of ruling with fear had ended in a single evening of truth. The new board wasted no time. Their first act was to announce a review of all fines and penalties from the last 2 years. Unfair charges would be canceled, and money taken unfairly would be refunded. The binder that Amina had built became the foundation of reform. Rules would still exist, but they would be applied fairly and clearly, not twisted into tools of control. The relief across the neighborhood was immediate. Smiles replaced frowns, and children played outside without their parents worrying about letters in the mailbox. A sense of peace returned, stronger than before. One evening, not long after the election, Rizwan sat on the porch with Amina. The air was warm, and the stars glimmered above. He turned to her with gratitude shining in his eyes. "You saved us," he said softly. Amina shook her head. "No, Rizwan. We saved each other, and the neighborhood saved itself. This was never about just us. It was about all of us learning that silence is not strength." He smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. Still, if you had not walked out in uniform that day, none of this would have begun. The officers would have left, but the board would have kept going. "You gave them a reason to stop and a reason for us to fight," she laughed gently. "Sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to start a chain of many more." As they sat together, neighbors passed by, waving warmly. Some stopped to chat, others simply smiled, but all carried an unspoken message: gratitude. The community was no longer divided by fear. It was united by hope. Rahim visited often, bringing fresh fruit from his small garden as a token of thanks. The young couple invited them for dinner, sharing laughter and dreams for the future. Even the elderly lady with the small dog seemed more cheerful, her steps lighter than before. The neighborhood had been reborn, not through anger but through unity and truth. Months later, when Rizwan received a simple letter in the mail, he felt a familiar worry rise for a second. But when he opened it, his face softened into a smile. It was not a warning or a fine. It was a community newsletter, filled with updates on events, gardening tips, and a kind note from the new board thanking everyone for their cooperation. He handed it to Amina, who read it with quiet pride. "This is how it should be," she said. "Respect, not fear. Community, not control." Their home felt brighter that night. The walls no longer held the shadows of worry. The street outside no longer carried the weight of suspicion. The neighborhood was alive again, and though they both knew challenges would come in the future, they also knew that fear would never again rule their lives. They had faced it once and defeated it together. For Rizwan and Amina, and for everyone around them, the HOA was no longer a nightmare. It had become what it was always meant to be: a group that served, not ruled. And it all began the day the police froze on their doorstep, when one woman in uniform stepped forward and changed everything.